So, Zohar, you just debuted a new website, Yochai. Let me just start by asking you, what is the significance of the name itself?
Shimon Bar Yochai was a second century sage who, according to Jewish tradition, authored the Zohar, which is a mystical book of the Middle Ages. Scholars say by Moshe de Leon, and it's my name. So that was a little wink in the tradition of medieval poets that do some self-referencing. Our logo is the carob tree that sustained Shimon Bar Yochai and his son for 12 years when they were in the cave, which I think is a nice metaphor for the sustenance that Torah study can offer us in a time when we might be in retreat.
Amazing. Oh, man, there's a whole class of rabbis whose last names end in I, and I cannot wait for there to be a software application for each and every one of them, Hi and Natronai and all the rest. So I want to get started by actually just taking a look at the site itself, because I think it's really interesting, and I think it's doing something that is different from the 1,000,001 religious chatbots that already exist on the market. So let me start just by opening it up. So if you're listening to the audio version of this, there's we're looking at a visual demo on screen. I will narrate so it is clear what is going on if you are just listening to the audio alone. When you originally log on, this is the screen you see. It looks like a chat interface. Let's say I want to investigate something about this week's Torah portion, the part of the Torah that is read in synagogues each week. So my understanding is you would go to the Parsha button that's below.
You could just ask Yochai about the Parsha, but if you click on the Parsha button, that's kind of another way to get oriented. We're sort of give people different hooks, different anchors to get in, but all pathways will more or less lead to the same place.
All right. This podcast is being released a week from the recording, so I'm going to pick actually next week's Parsha Pinchas, and let's see what happens. Okay. So tell me a little bit about what I'm seeing on the screen right now.
On the right-hand side, you're seeing Parshat Pinchas and a little bit before Parshat Pinchas. So much like, you could go to Sefaria and open up the Parsha. And then on the left-hand side, you're getting Yochai's guidance on the Parsha. And if you see that word lenses underneath, so if you want to study through a particular lens, you can select one. You don't have to.
Right. So underneath the place where I would ordinarily put the next prompt, there is a button that says lenses. I can click on it, and it gives me a range of perspectives with which the chat interface will interact with me. So those range from classical to Jewish legal, philosophical, literary, spiritual, and historical. I'm curious how you decided on those as the archetypes for what it means to interact with a chatbot about Jewish knowledge.
My long-term goal is to get people like you and other rabbis and scholars to contribute their own lenses. I try to take the ones that I think represent 90% of the types of approaches that the average learner would take to a text. I think classical is like, what does the text mean? Right. Pshat is what it would be called in our tradition. Halachic, a lot of Jews care about what are the legal implications. You might not be asking that when you're studying, let's say, a work on character development. But I think for Parsha in particular, all of these are at play. Philosophical, Maimonides is a great paragon of that, right? It's like, hey, the Torah just used the language of God has a body, but I know God doesn't, so I need to be reading through that lens. Literary is my favorite, which is like, what is the language doing? What's the structure doing? How can this be read as a work of deliberate art in some sense? Spiritual, I would venture to say, is what 80% of our users care about. Self-help. Like, what does this actually mean for how I can be happy and successful? I don't care what the text means. I want to be inspired. I want to be better. And then historical, I'd say that's like for the academics, right? Which is like, we need to understand what Pinchas would have been thinking about in his historical context, or what was the author of this story thinking in this historical context. Again, it doesn't quite work as well for Parsha because of the biblical criticism being more contentious. But like when you're reading Talmud or something like that, I think this framework works really well.
Okay, so I want to get back to what you just said in a second. On the left side of the screen, I am seeing the initial response given by the AI. And it's saying, because it knows that I've asked about this already, you've asked this 3 times now, which tells me something is pulling yourself towards Pinchas. let's go. You're sitting on Numbers 25:10, the very opening verse of Pinchas. So again, Pinchas is the name of the Torah portion that is going to be read this week. God spoke to Moses saying, the next verse delivers God's response to what Pinchas did. Here's the classic question to start with. Why does the parsha begin here with God's reaction rather than with Pinchas' act itself? The rabbis could have cut the parsha differently. They didn't. So what do you make of that editorial choice? So I'm getting the sense here that the AI is somewhat, I don't know if aggressive is the right word, but is not just leaving it up to me to decide what direction the conversation is going to go in. It suggests pretty clearly an initial direction, which I can then choose to engage with or modify. Is that about right?
I think the default lens is classical here. I'm not sure that was such a classical question. So I am curious, like why did it decide to do that? It could be based upon previous conversations it had with you. It's guessing that this is the direction that might resonate with you. But on the back end is just a super complex knowledge graph that we built that essentially mapped 16 million interrelationships between any semantic unit in our library. And on that basis, it's essentially leveraging that data to come up with these questions.
So it's asking me, the rabbis could have cut the parsha differently. Why is this the beginning of this week's portion? I'm going to play a little bit dumb and say, I don't know. What do you think? And see what I get. Okay, you're sitting right at the hinge, it tells me. Verse 25:10 is where God pivots from the catastrophe of Baal Peor to reward Pinchas. I should say, by the way, this assumes like some level of sophistication. So if I was approaching this text having less of a background either in the Bible or in Hebrew, then I may need to adjust it. I want to ask actually about the assumptions about knowledge background. Is that something that the system has already learned based on my previous interactions? Does it go in with a default assumption about level of knowledge or background?
Great questions. So we have in our settings the ability to tune Yochai and essentially tell Yochai about who you are, how you like to learn, anything really. Yochai might make some default assumptions if you don't play with the settings and over assume that you're more literate than you are. But if you tell it, I'm a 13-year-old, I don't know Hebrew, I've never been to synagogue in my life, it should be able to accommodate that quite easily.
Yeah, let's see what happens if I tell it that. I'm a 13-year-old. I don't know Hebrew. I've never been to synagogue in my life. Please help. All right. It seems like it's kind of resetting, right? Welcome. You're in exactly the right place, and you don't need any of that background to do this. And now it's kind of going to more basics, right? We're in the book of Numbers near the end. The Jewish people are wandering in the desert for 40 years. It introduces this character named Pinchas who does something dramatic, and then God speaks, and then goes back to the question, why does God speak to Moses about what Pinchas did? Pinchas is the one who acted. Moses didn't do anything here. What do you think? Does it seem strange that God talks to Moses instead of going straight to Pinchas? So one thing I note that makes this immediately distinct from other religious chatbots that I've interacted with is that it is looking to me to supply my own ideas rather than supplying a stream of information. And that seems like a very deliberate design choice. And can you talk a little bit about how you got to that choice?
Yeah, for sure. And just like you can kind of tell Yochai, hey, I'm not as literate as you think, you can also tell Yochai, I'm really not into the Socratic questioning. Like, just tell me what you think. Like, my opinion doesn't matter. I'm not learned enough to have an opinion. Because I do get that from some people, not just illiterate people, even advanced people. They're like, oh, Yochai, stop asking me. Like, it's exhausting, That being said, our general view is that an AI that just does the work for you doesn't teach you anything. Like, teaching happens when there's friction, when there's thinking. So we want the person to think. And also, we're both Jewish. I think one of the things we appreciate, I'll speak for myself. One of the things I appreciate deeply is that the answer is tentative. The insight is what question you choose to ask. And there's many questions you could ask. There's 70 questions you could ask to put in a traditional parlance. And I feel that in a way, a Jewish Torah app should teach people the method of thinking, of reasoning in a Jewish way, rather than just giving them doctrinal bottom line of like, yeah, here's what Jews think. Like that. If you get the answer, here's what Jews think, even though the Maimonides, that's what he tried to do with the 13 principles, you've lost something.
How do you decide which sorts of questions are appropriate for this particular context? How does the model decide what it should be asking within this framework?
there's a suite of system prompts. So there's like a basic system prompt that powers global yohai, like yohai for the site. And then depending on what task you're on within the site, there's sort of like these sub agents essentially. And each of them has a goal for you. And so the goal of this particular instance of yohai is like to get the person to think about the parsha and what it means. If you went to a spiritual, it would be like to think about what this parsha has to say about how I can live in a more elevated way or whatever. So there's AIs have a goal. They're path independent in a way how they get there, and I think that's some of where the magic happens. It's some combination of using the knowledge graph to make interesting connections that are, in my view, objective. Like there are real patterns in the tradition. And then a subjective or artful dimension, which I think is the dimension we all experience from great teachers and rabbis, which is like, I think they really tailored that to me. And the way that I asked, and they mirrored that. And AIs are also good at reading the patterns of the interlocutor and giving that back.
If you were following on video, you may have just seen that I asked, listen, my bar mitzvah is next week, and I didn't write a speech. Please write something for me. And the AI does something that presumably has been carefully programmed. It says, that's a big moment coming up. Congratulations. I'm not going to write it for you because honestly, a speech in your own words will land so much better than anything I hand you, but I will help you build it right now and it won't take long. And then it gives some initial ideas of things I might want to look at and then asks me a further question, guiding me, the 13-year-old boy, through the process of thinking through my own feelings about this Torah portion and trying to decide based on that what I might want to say. I assume there's a lot of thought put into this decision to not have this be a tool that writes speeches for people. Can you talk about that?
For sure. I think if you go to the homepage, one of the modes is Devar Torah. So like you could get...
Devar Torah meaning a sermon.
Yeah.
Roughly.
So there is a mode in which you really could walk away with an artifact with the sermon written for you by the AI. But I'd say two things on that. One is it's still going to be like this in the sense of it's going to interview you and try to draw you out and build around your thoughts. Two, it's going to have the process of coming up with that artifact be educational, and it's going to refuse to just one-shot it. And then the third thing I'll say, and this is more of like the buyer beware, it's the onus on the learner rather than on us, but I don't think that what it gives you is going to meet the bar for like, okay, great, I'm just going to read this. So these artifacts are not meant to be perfect. They're meant to be 80% good enough, which I think is remarkable. And then hopefully you have the taste and the temperament to finish up. So yes, there was a lot of thought put into this in particular, but also just more generally, we want the learner to learn. So as much friction as we can give without them being upset with us, we see that as productive. And I would say a similar thing I've seen in Moshe Kapel's Rav Dikta program, he feels similarly about this, is you ask it to give you an answer to your question. And it doesn't even have to be a legal question. Like you could say, why do bad things happen to good people? Or like, what's better, herring or matzah? Any question. And it will answer in the style of Rav Moshe Feinstein and give you sources.
So an important 20th century American Jewish legal decisor.
But like he gives you the sources as part of that. In the hope is that you go and you look up those sources. So who knows if people in fact do that? But everyone has a strategy for basically saying, okay, I've taught you the Torah on one foot, but now go and learn the rest of it.
Does it tell you consult your local rabbi?
Theirs does at the bottom, like it's a disclaimer. We don't put that disclaimer explicitly, but if you ask it to give you a halakhic answer to something and it's like a legal ruling and it suspects that you're asking for practical purposes, it will probably push you to do that or at least tell you, hey, just, I'm not a posek, but I'm sure you could force its hand if you had to.
Yeah. I want to go back to the lenses idea for a second, because I don't know if you're a gamer, but there is this important philosophical debate in the gaming community about being able to choose the difficulty of a game. There are some gamers who feel very strongly that if I, the player, get to choose whether to play on easy mode, or hard mode, then I don't really have a sense of what the true experience of the game is, because I am ultimately deciding for myself what sort of game I'd like to play, and that if I really want to play a game authentically, I need the developer to decide for me or to say, here's the mode that the game was designed on. Here's the mode that we recommend you to play on. So here as well, I kind of have a similar question where what does it mean that I get to choose the sort of study partner that this AI is going to be? Does that remove some of the illusion that there is some friction in this relationship? How do you think about that?
I do agree with that as an interesting point, but not with regards to lenses. So I think that lenses are more like the equivalent of there's 6 different mini games you can play within one app. Like you can go in this room or you can go in this room, but choose your own adventure. I think where the question becomes more pointed is really like if I tell Yochai, hey, I'm not that confident, go easy on me, it will pander to me. And if I say, I'm a Rosh Yeshiva and like
I'm the head of a seminary.
I'm the head of a seminary and like unless you stump me, I'm giving you 1 star on GitHub. Right? Like it will accommodate that. So I think that's really the question is with AI, you have so much more control to tell it what to do. And with an actual chavruta, an actual study partner, you would never get to be so domineering. So even though our AI is not apparently sycophantic in its own way, it's still sycophantic in that it's trying to please you in the way that you like to learn, right? Whereas a true chavruta might be so displeasing that you walk away ready to never talk to that person again or ready to shout. So yeah, this is not a real chavruta and it doesn't have the real friction that comes with the messiness of real relationships. It is a mirror. But for a mirror, I think it's better than the default way that people use AI, which is give me the answer as quickly as possible. Do the task for me right now. Make no mistakes. Go.
I want to look at a different part of the site. Let's look at the source sheet creator. All right. So I'm going to say, make me a source sheet about abortion in Jewish thought. And let's see what it does.
Okay. Now, just for the listeners, we probably need to contextualize what a source sheet is. When you teach a class, you typically provide sources. And in a good class, the sources might come also with some framing. And so the best way to make a source sheet right now for a lot of teachers is you go in Safaria and you add the sources from their library manually. I thought it would be a little bit of a step up to not have to go manually add the sources and also to be able to discover sources without, you don't necessarily know what it is that you're looking for. So this is our attempt to solve that problem.
Okay, so it responds by saying, this is a rich and important topic. I'd love to help you build a focused sheet. A few quick questions. Who is your audience? A general adult learner, a halachic, so a Jewish legal study group, medical professionals, students encountering debate for the first time. What angle do you want to center? For instance, the halachic status of the fetus, the range of permissibility across poskim, so legal decisors, the tension between Rambam and later authorities, or a more philosophical exploration of competing values, and any length or tone constraints. A single session's worth of primary texts or a broader survey, including modern responses. So I will say this is for a synagogue lunch event on an upcoming Shabbat. I really just want to focus on the legal aspects and come across as being fair and fairly neutral, let's say. All right, so it's taking a second to think. Okay, so it says I have enough to start shaping the sheet. I'm going to anchor it first and let the sources build the arc. I'm looking for sources that can carry the teaching arc, not just mention this topic. And now it's continuing to think. Do you want to talk while we're waiting about the end product that the source sheet feature is designed to build?
Yeah, it's supposed to build something that you can either print out or share as an email or an attachment. And then there's a couple filters. There's like a teacher version that has some of the things that you might say, but you wouldn't want your students to necessarily know where you're leading them, and a student version. And then there's ways to filter in terms of just the Hebrew or just the English or Hebrew and English. There's like some ways to orient the text sort of side by side. And that's mainly it. There's also obviously the ability to delete a source or to manually add sources or to move them around. And then something that I think probably isn't working in this particular moment, but should in the next like day or two would be you can then tell Yochai, okay, like that was a good first draft, but add 2 more sources or take this one away. So here we go.
Okay, so it just popped up with a source sheet. The title is Legal Considerations in Jewish Thought on Pregnancy. There is a teacher version and a student version. So the teacher version has ideas about discussion questions that I might ask about each text that appears on this page. There are a couple of sources, at least to start out with.
Yeah.
It also gives me options to have it appear in both Hebrew and English, just Hebrew or just English. The student version gets rid of those notes that you were talking about before. And
probably should have given you more sources, but
probably should give me more sources so I can continue to edit this as you say. So one of the sources is a passage from the Talmud about the relationship between a fetus and its mother's body. And the second is a source also from the same page of the Talmud, also part of the kind of legal conversation around it. So this is one of the sources. I imagine, as this feature gets built out, the sophistication and the number of sources will expand. But I think I get the idea of where this is going to take me. I'm curious, for questions like this, there's important philosophical assumptions, questions about where I sit on the religious spectrum in terms of the kinds of answers it gives me. So, one person might want to see feminist sources. One person might actually be offended if there are no sources by women on the source sheet, especially for a question like this. Somebody else might be offended if there is a source that is by a non-Jewish authority. How do you think about default assumptions in that area? Obviously, my sense is you can do a lot of fiddling with it in the settings.
For our first version of Yochai, we restricted ourselves to roughly 1,100 sources, mostly from Sefaria and a couple hundred from Dicta. Most of those are pre-20th century sources, and we did not bring in, let's say, academic text. And Yochai, by design, really does draw from a library and try to direct you to a library. So Yochai is quite limited in 2 ways. One is the system prompt of Yochai, and the other is what Yochai has direct access to. Yochai could for sure read the internet and read articles, but Yochai is not going to be able to just cite them, nor would Yochai try to have a circle of competence that is just outside of Yochai's expertise. So what I'm trying to say with that is that for a source sheet, if you're looking for female sources for the version 1 or feminist perspectives, we just don't have that in our library right now. We hope we can build the library out to have a more representative sample. But we wanted to start with the most iconic and foundational Jewish texts just to kind of get a proof of concept. And also those ones are not under copyright. There's sort of many reasons for starting with this. But I think that over time, the knowledge graph can for sure expand to include a range of perspectives.
Incredible. Do you want to pick one more feature?
We kind of already showed the personalization before, but I feel like Tune shows it in a more dramatic way.
Okay. So I'm going to start a new chat and pull up Tune. Okay.
Okay. So this is, I would say, if you just tell it like in a sentence who you are, make up a persona and how you like to learn. Like the one that I did earlier today, that was fun for me. I was like, I'm a Heidegger scholar. I've got no Hebrew literacy, and I'm interested in reading the Bible through a Heideggerian lens and coming up with the readings that sort of do for the Bible what Heidegger did for the pre-Socratics. Can you pick a text and teach me something?
Okay, so I'm writing, I grew up Chabad, but left in my early 20s. I am now in my 50s and reconnecting to my roots. I'm a mom and work as an epidemiologist. So it is tuning to the sources.
It goes back to your question about the gaming philosophy and making it explicit, but I just thought it's a cool forcing function to force people to be self-aware about where they're coming from, because often that does inform how we want to learn, but we rarely say it. There are a lot of stories in a room, and the teacher doesn't always have access to those stories.
All right, so it is catching me out on my lie, because previously I said that I was a 13-year-old boy, and now I clearly am not. So it says, what a rich text of lenses you're bringing. A Chabad childhood means you have Hasidic melodies and ideas somewhere in your bones, even if they've been quiet for a while. Whose bar mitzvah are you preparing for? Your son? All right.
Okay, fine.
So I'll say, sure. All right, and now it's actually connecting. Is this connected to the source sheet that I started before? Like it's connecting the threads, because I was asking about Pinchas and now abortion, and now I describe who I am. And so it brings up the source sheet that I'd just been working on. And it says to me, Mazel Tov, that's a big moment, especially given your own journey back. What does preparing mean to you right now? Are you thinking about helping him find meaning in his parsha, or is part of this about you wanting to feel grounded and present for us? So tell me a little bit about like when I choose the
Yeah.
tune feature, what is this conversation trying to get at?
In an ideal world, tune is the ability to make yourself explicit to Yochai, which I think means that Yochai is going to adapt to your explicit preferences. Yochai is already going to adapt to your implicit preferences. Like you asked before about what assumptions is it making about you. So it might start with some assumptions and then revise those based upon how you engage with it. But if you're really complex or really specific, it might help to just tell Yochai that from the beginning, almost like onboard yourself into Yochai. And then Yochai keeps that file on you, ideally, and remembers you. So you don't have to keep telling it that. But I also really like this idea for myself as someone who is a little bit more of a jokester to play around with personas. So I actually really like the idea of role playing. And for me, tune is less about Yochai satisfying my preferences and more almost like this lenses concept, but through a subjective perspective rather than through a textual one. So like in this moment, I get to impersonate a Lakewood rabbi who's really into Brisker Lamdus. And in this moment, I get to be a Reformed camp counselor trying to help 13-year-olds with self-esteem. And like, I just find that very rich to see how Yochai might handle that almost in a meta way for how I might think about presenting Torah to a range of possible perspectives.
Yeah. All right. I'm going to stop sharing. There are a lot of products online that are dedicated to Jewish learning. A lot of them are built as kind of prosumer goods. They're designed for people who already have pretty significant background in Jewish knowledge and help them navigate perhaps more efficiently those sources they have at their disposal, but they assume they already know quite a bit. How do you imagine the potential audience for a tool like this?
I think to start, you have to reach people who already accept that Torah learning is something that should be of interest. But as you saw from that opening canvas, that opening homepage, we don't start with a library. We don't sort of say the way into Torah learning is to take a book off the shelf. We think the way in is with a question, with a statement. And indirectly, you'll get to do Torah study. So to answer the question, you have to be in search of enchantment. Because why would you spend your time learning anything, let alone something thousands of years old? So I think you have to be interested in enchantment. You also can't be too self-confident because then like, why do you need this tool? Like I already got the books. I know how to read them. I know what book I'm looking for. Anyone in between those should be an ideal learner for us, Jew or non-Jew. Lord Sachs says the best way to reach the Jews is to reach the non-Jews. So I think that especially in the age of the algorithm, like we just don't know who's out there and what's going to bring them. So I think we just have to maximize the surface area for spontaneity. And in terms of how I think about our go-to-market or like our initial adapters, I think there's probably roughly 3 vectors. I think there's rabbis and scholars and teachers for whom their life could be made easier through our research capabilities, through the ability to execute source sheets or to come up with Divrei Torah ideas, sermon ideas, or to think about how you might teach a class. There's tech people that are interested, I think, in like AI education, AI for good, AI welfare, AI alignment, AI ethics, reasoning, maybe not necessarily in Torah, but like this is something in the space that could perhaps be of intellectual curiosity. I think there's a lot of Jews, especially post October 7th, that may not even identify as intellectual. They may not have wanted to learn Torah 2 years ago, 3 years ago, but now they want to do something that demonstrates themselves and others that they care about who they are, and they're looking for a place to start. And they may not be institutionally affiliated, they might be. And we built Yochai also to be in WhatsApp. So the hope is that Yochai could also support community and social. It doesn't have to be a purely solo experience. And I think for those people, this could be powerful.
Cool. So I want to give a voice to some of the criticism that I see around AI-driven learning applications. I think the source sheet one in particular, I've seen other, I think less sophisticated, but other source sheet builders driven by AI that have faced quite a bit of criticism and actually anger among Jewish educators out of a sense that the work of stringing sources together, of figuring out, I want to teach about X topic and I want to think through and use my own mind to imagine what are the relevant sources here, is kind of a core task that I want to engage in. And I do not want an AI system that is offering up the possibility of taking it over for me. And I certainly don't want a system that I'm expected to use, which would then take from me a task that I actually really love. I understand that you are trying to navigate around some of the criticisms by putting the agency back in the hands of the user by saying, what do you think? Here's an idea, but you run with the ball. How would you respond to critics who would say the very presence of a product like this represents a threat to the way that I do Jewish education or the way that I engage in Jewish learning?
I would respond Socratically the way Yochai would, and I would say that you'd tell me more. Well, why are you threatened? Why are you angry? What are your goals when you think about putting together a source sheet? Yeah, I would really just genuinely want to probe, not even to deflect, and understand what's behind that, because from the face of it, it's hard for me to inhabit that perspective. I'm someone that loves to do the work, by the way. Like, I'm not the kind of person that wants AI to do any of this work for me, but I personally feel that I'm able to do so much more of the work I love because AI is working for me. So like right now, I've got this knowledge graph hooked up to my codex. So even though I do spend time in the Yochai front end, like I feel that for myself as someone who's more, AI native, I can go even faster using Yochai more as a personal agent than as an app. And so the source sheet product is really meant to solve the undifferentiated heavy lifting of like things like formatting. There's a lot of annoying things that go into making a source sheet. Like, again, clicking through the Sefaria interface and manually adding a text. Or if you're not doing that and you're doing it even more old school, going through Bar Ilan, copy pasting, putting to Google Doc, adjusting the Hebrew settings and the English setting. Like, how is that meaningful work? Like, if it takes an hour to prepare a source sheet, what percentage of your time is going to commodified, not rabbinic, non-scholarly work, and what percent is going to the creativity?
Yeah, but I think you're getting to a question that ends up being kind of core and that I've seen show up in a lot of discussions about the place of AI in religious learning spaces, which is, where does difficulty sit? Is difficulty something to be eliminated? Is there a point in ensuring that difficulty remains both in Jewish learning and also in Jewish teaching? And how do you make sure that you are not simply inserting difficulty because your own learning experience is difficult, but because it actually serves some kind of function? And so like this question of like, what part of putting together a class is optimizable and which part of it is like it's actually valuable to noodle around and try to figure out what's relevant, it makes a difference.
Source sheets aren't a product. Like, source sheets are notes. Okay, they're notes and a little nice receipt that you can give to people to help them follow along. In fact, I would say many people will show up the last minute of a class, say, give me the source sheet. And, if it wasn't a good class, that's great. I didn't have to sit through it. I just have the sources. And other times it's like, hey, I really missed out on what you did with these sources. I have no idea what this actually is. And like, when's the last time that you went to Sefaria and said, let me find a source sheet and
Sefaria
read
meaning
through it?
a major website for accessing Jewish texts.
I have never read a source sheet on Sefaria, like for the sake of a learning, right? Because like what I want is how the teacher in the moment brings it all together. And the source sheet comes to enable that. So I guess what I'm pushing back on is the idea that the source sheet in the first place was ever like that important. Like, what's important is the moment of like, it's hard enough being a teacher with people in lifetime. Whether you have a source sheet you made or a source sheet that you made with AI, you're still accountable to that. What difficulty have I removed?
It's funny, you're pointing to the possibility of change in a Jewish learning product that I think for people who are Gen X, Millennials, Gen Z is kind of a permanent fixture of the Jewish learning environment, right? Like a few pieces of paper that have a number of sources in Hebrew and or English on them. But this concept is really quite new, right? Like, it starts with the invention of the photocopy machine and then kind of goes from there. And you can imagine other ways of engaging with Jewish text that look quite different. So one thing that's tricky about the platform, and I think this is not just true about your platform, but about AI systems in general, is that they're both attempting to help people do the things they were doing already more efficiently and also necessarily change the kinds of work that people are going to be doing. So let me ask you a question based on that. I know that you've been thinking about the end product or where the the energy goes into Jewish learning as the cost of translation goes to zero, as the cost of access of text goes to zero. You wrote an essay in May about Jevon's paradox and how it applies to Jewish learning. Can you talk a little bit about Jevon's paradox and the argument that you're making in that essay?
Well, I basically just took an idea that is well talked about in tech and applied it to our niche, Jewish education. And the argument, why is it being made in the first place? It's being made because there's a lot of like doom and apocalyptic thinking in the mainstream media, which is that AI is going to take over the world and nobody's going to want to do anything human. And Jevon's paradox is really about how when the cost of something goes down, there's actually more demand for that thing. Like there was more demand for coal when the cost of coal went down by like an order of magnitude. And so there could be an order of magnitude jump in the desire for education as the cost of these tools goes down, and then Jewish education in our particular instance. But to your point, what humans are then doing versus what the AIs are doing, it changes from the previous. So whereas before, I would say the teacher was responsible for literacy, it's possible that like AI will just be much better at teaching all those more objective things, which means that the human has to move up to the more emotional things like motivation, meaning making, application, synthesis. If you think of Bloom's taxonomy, you start by giving someone the ingredients, repeat it back to me, and you end with the like, okay, go cook something. So most teachers, I would assume, complain that they don't get enough time to do the cooking part, which is the fun part, because they're so busy just gathering the ingredients. And the hope and my firm belief is that now it will be much easier to gather the ingredients, and therefore the teacher can move up the stack to the more high level, tasteful stuff, the stuff that requires a point of view, the stuff that requires ambiguity, the stuff that requires a context window that an AI just won't be able to have. Obviously, the embodied element, the sense of like we're in the same community. Like, so if your job was teaching somebody how to translate a line of Talmud, like read the Aramaic, no, that's incorrect, read it again. Like, yeah, you're going to be out of a job because the AI is going to do that better than you. But if the job is let's have a great conversation about what this piece of Talmud was doing in its time and why it matters now, and connect to the Talmud and feel inspired by the Talmud, I think humans are going to have a golden age to be able to do that because they no longer have to spend as much time doing all those important requisite parts that give you the entry ticket to do the harder stuff.
All right. I noticed you brought up the word tasteful subtly, which,
Yeah.
if you're in the world of Silicon Valley, maybe you were triggered that this is a concept that's been going around for a year or more. The idea that the role of human beings in general in a world that is filled with AI is to be kind of tastemakers or taste deciders. And so the energy as well for Jewish learning, I understand you saying, is also going to shift towards human beings as deciders of what is the particular insight that is most pertinent or most worth bringing to people today. So I have two questions for you. One is like a kind of obvious question. How confident are you that this too, this kind of taste making, will also not be replaced by AI? And the second is like, let's say it's not replaced. Let's say, humans really do become those tastemakers. All the hours and hours spent on formatting source sheets, dealing with the finicky nuances of putting Hebrew language and English language into the same document, which, I don't even know how many hours I've spent in Microsoft Word trying to make that work. So like imagine all that goes away and all the energy in Jewish learning really does go to the kind of the core, let's come up with a new idea. Let's figure out something that's emotionally resonant or, spiritually enlightening. What does a world like that actually look like? Does that mean there's 50 times as many sermons being written? What does it look like in a world where all the energy really can go directly to what you call chidush, right? The Hebrew word for originality, innovation, some kind of original insight. What does that world look like?
I think there's probably a lot more peer-to-peer learning. There's a lot more informal authority or sort of bottom-up leadership. And we see that more generally with technology trends that you're the expert here. But this is just another wave towards democratization, where in some sense, and this might be why rabbis and scholars are threatened, like jargon is a moat. Like there's a lot of things that 5 years ago, you kind of just felt secure because you had this inside information and it was really hard to get that inside information. And that inside information could be, I know how to translate this book. It could be, I know how to format the source sheet, a whole stack of things. And like you have to pay a lot of money to go and get that insider information. And the incentive to go and do that isn't much. So in a sense, you're buffered by regulation. It's a good business. If the cost of that insider information goes down, your moat vanishes. Moat being a term from the business world. Your competitive advantage vanishes on that metric. So you need to compete on a different metric, and that metric is going to be something like your ability to connect interpersonally with people, or something like that. Your ability to build community rather than your ability to have the answers. At the same time, like the desire for someone to officiate a wedding, to do a circumcision, to help a bereaved person, like there are fundamental life cycle things that just aren't going away. So like I think synagogue rabbis are very secure from that perspective. Maybe their asset value has jumped up. To your question about what does it mean to live in a world where it's a lot easier to do this commodified stuff, I see an optimistic scenario where the bottlenecks to developing good habits diminish. And so there's more chiddush production, there's more time spent learning. I think that there's a lot of competition out there too, because the price of everything else is going to zero. So why you would choose to learn Torah, even when it's really easy to make a sermon, when you could just make an AI video about something not related to Torah. Like there's a lot you can do besides that. But I personally feel unlocked by this. I feel more on fire. And I'm also eager to get better at learning how to use these tools. Like I think in a way, the responsibility of a Jewish leader becomes less about knowing what's in the books and more actually about understanding the technology and how to utilize it to make the most of this platform shift.
Part of what you are saying raises the larger question of what is Torah actually for? What is this supposed to be used for? Is it supposed to do some kind of good in the world through particular statements? Is it there as a kind of medium through which people can be in relationship? And you're kind of developing a technology that forces you to actually be more explicit about your intentions in engaging with Torah study. How do you imagine that our tastes might actually change as chidush proliferates or the barrier to entry goes down? Just to kind of expand on the question for a second, with many technologies, maybe every technology, there is this kind of transition period where the initial use cases are, well, we're going to do the thing that we did with the old technology, but now with the new technology, and it's easier. And at some point, people realize, but actually this technology allows for things that had not previously been possible. And there develops some new medium or some new objective. You know, you saw this with the internet, certainly, right? Like the difference between like Web 1.0 and Web 2.0. And you can imagine for AI as well that there is some version of AI-driven or AI-enabled Torah study that truly would not have been possible without the use of these new tools. I don't have a particular idea in mind, but I'm curious if you have a thought about what that next generation of innovative Jewish learning might look like.
You said two things in your comments, so I want to touch on both of them. One was like, what is the point of Torah study? So that's like a great question. And the other is like, how are habits going to change as a result of this adoption and diffusion? So we built Yochai in a way that's interface agnostic. Like we took a position for now on what it looks like to engage with AI that basically does look like Web 2.0 rather than Web 3.0. It's still a website. And the layer after that is obviously you can download the knowledge graph and plug it into your Claude or your Codex and engage with your own Yochai there. I think what's coming is a Chrome plugin that has access to, like an operating system that has access to all of your emails, that can sit with us in our Zoom meetings and give me Torah sources or give me a perspective as we're talking, that can give me a morning brief on what I should be thinking about this day, and holding me accountable every week to what my goals were from a Jewish perspective. Or we have another product, Alexandria, that would be doing that, but from the perspective of the liberal arts, and we're going to build one for Eastern texts. And so you can imagine that there's a body of wisdom out there that people care about. The question is, what's the best way to engage with that wisdom? What's the best form factor? If you strip it down and go back to first principles, there's the goal of like intellectual curiosity and intellectual practice. There's the spiritual practice of like getting better as a person. And there's the community element, which is sort of like, it almost doesn't matter what we learn. It's just good to feel connected to one another. I like to know hey, DZ, you're learning the parser this week. So I feel like I'm part of something bigger than myself. So I think AI will enable people to be more explicit about what their goals are and pursue those goals. Will it change our goals? I have no idea, but I kind of conservative in this view. I feel like the fundamental human needs don't really change that much. Like we're still going to want to be better people, broadly construed, right? Like more morally perfect, more successful, more happy. So we're going to be wanting to talk about our lives and hopefully not even having to just tell Yochai about your life, but Yochai already knows because Yochai read every single email in WhatsApp. And then I think for some of us, maybe not as many of us, we want to feel like we're learning something, that today my frontier of knowledge grew and I scratched that itch as a cognitive creature, that I expanded my own neural net. And maybe it was pointless because AI already knows so much more than me. But hey, God knows so much more than me, and that didn't stop me from feeling like I should learn. On the contrary, I'm going to pursue as much knowledge as I can, even if when I zoom out, I know basically nothing. Like there's just an intrinsic value in, I think, intellectual curiosity. I think when we say Talmud Torah Keneged Kulam, the value of Torah kind of has this elevated value. Some of that sentiment comes down to there's a value in this irrespective of its application. So I think Torah has both. I think if it had no application, that would be bad. But if you related to it purely through the lens of what's the cash value, that would diminish the activity itself.
When ChatGPT launched, it seemed like the chat paradigm was going to be the thing that won the day. And we're now kind of getting to a place with AI systems where chat continues to exist, but it's only one of the ways in which people are interacting with AI systems. As we were recording, Anthropic just a couple days ago released this product Claude Tag, which is an AI that sits in your Slack channel that can interact not just with you, but also with your team. So I'm wondering how you think about this as being a product that could interact with not just one person, but maybe two people, like a chavruta, like a Jewish study pair who are studying text together, or with a group of people as being a kind of like a group product as opposed to an individual, sitting at home, asking questions by themselves.
It's built to be form factor adaptive. Like we want to be where the people are. We want to solve problems that people have. And so if people feel that there's a value in having a group dynamic with Yochai, and that's not even a chat dynamic, but it's like at Yochai, can you write that fundraising email for me? And Yochai goes and does it. What makes that Jewish? Well, I don't know. There's a lot of people out there who run Jewish non-for-profits that have to write fundraising emails. And one of the things they probably do is think about how can I make this authentic to the mission and values of my organization. Like imagine Yochai has access to all of that in its memory and also has this really powerful knowledge graph and knows all of its chats with you. It could probably do a really good job, maybe not executing that letter end to end, but giving you the outline for what that letter should be. So I think an agentic Yochai that does stuff for you, powered by Torah, like that would be awesome.
I know from personal experience that working on developing products for other people to use changes your relationship to those products themselves. I've worked on, ritual books, and it changed my relationship to ritual books because it was no longer something that I could approach with the same reverence because I kind of knew the secret formula of like, how do you make a book that feels like it is reverential? And you're doing something similar in that you're kind of building a product that people should, I think, ideally have some respect for. How has your work on Yochai changed your own relationship with text study? Is being behind the scenes, does that change the way that you think about your own engagement with Jewish texts?
I'm not sure if it's only working on Yochai or if it's just being part of this more general moment, but I feel that in a way I've come to view books as a form factor for helping people learn. But my reverence for books or even texts has diminished, and I still love them and I think they're tremendous. But in a way, I think that what matters is the learning process and the learning outcome rather than the way in which those are enabled. And so in a way, it made it more explicit how I just took for granted that the book is a way of delivering a learning experience, but I hadn't thought in too meta a way about how that learning actually happens. And there's so much, especially as a reader myself, like it's a lot of time quiet, thinking to yourself and then telling someone, hey, I read this book, you should read it too. One thing I've been doing of late is giving texts to Yochai in the backend, giving it to Codex with access to the knowledge graph, and basically saying, if you were to turn this book into a skill, like the goal isn't regurgitate what the thesis of the book is and how they argued for it, but rather teach me the skill of looking at the world or looking at a text the way that this book's author was able to do. That's what I want to learn. Don't teach me what Maimonides thought about X, Y, and Z. Teach me how to be a Maimonidean, but do it in a way that pulls directly from the text and, in a sense, sees this text as code. It's a source code, and turns that, reverse engineers it into a pedagogic skill. So I've been doing that, and I found it very fruitful. So in a way, I've now come to view like text as code, and it's code that can be then utilized or reverse engineered from to teach skills. And I think that the highest aspect of learning is to learn how to see the world the way that the people that wrote these books saw the world, and not necessarily to agree 100% with any one of them, but to have these lenses, to have the ability to say, right now, I want to know, what would Maimonides say about this? What would Judy Klitzner say about this? What would Rabbi Foreman say about this, et cetera? And I've got my sort of bench of champions, and now I'm empowered to be me. That's my taste. My taste is the 5 skills I spend the most time with, so to say.
There's one more question I have to ask you. I just can't resist. And maybe this is a question that you're specifically not the right person to ask this question of. Do you think there is a value in intentionally avoiding the use of AI in any particular Jewish learning context as a way of kind of preserving an AI-less environment? Or is that A, pointless exercise because it won't work, or B, not even desirable?
I'm sort of like with Jonathan Haidt, at least for the younger years, that there's just something about an environment that's screenless, that's naive and wonderful, and like screens create distraction, et cetera, et cetera. Now to your question of like, when do you decide to use it? When do you decide not to? The main reason not to use AI is if it's going to stop you from thinking. The main reason to use AI is if it can actually help you be an even more powerful thinker. So I don't think it's correct to just sort of say AI makes you lazy. It really depends on which AI and how you're using it. I'm trying to create an AI that makes you less lazy, and we'll see how it goes.
Okay. I'm excited to see how the platform develops. Thanks for speaking with me, and congratulations on the launch.
Thanks for talking. It was great.